is happening? Okay. I think it is going up. It is going. Oh, it's going. What is happening now? I wanted it to finish. Well, that is it. Thank you very much. That is it. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gaston, for sticking to time. I was going to add 1 minute for the pointer, but thank you. I think already the theme around special purpose vehicles has been coming up quite a bit, and I think no one better to perhaps touch on it than a central banker who's also an investment banker, who's also a development banker. So let me welcome Mr. Charles Singili, Managing Director of Tanzania Investment Bank, to give us his presentation. Karibu.
Trying to pick some technology. Habari za mchana. I hope everyone should have, by now, kila mmoja anajua kuzungumza Kiswahili. Asanteni. My outline is a bit heavy. Given the time, I think I'll be jumping on some of the few slides, but before I do that, let me introduce my partners, who are in this room. I am the chair of the network of DFIs in the SADC region. TIB is the chair of the SADC network, and now we have Stuart Kufein, who is our ED at the Development Financial Research Center. Can you stand up, please? And in the room, we have our partner. We do collaborate as DFI. I have Pwele Davis from DBSA, we signed an MOU to collaborate in investing on some of the projects. So this is how we do, and we leverage on some of the resources within the region. Davis, can you stand up? Thank you, Davis. I will skip some of these because they are part of it in the pack. But what I wanted to introduce is that, we are partnering with other DFIs in the region, complement expertise in areas where we have deficiencies. And DBSA is one of our partners. As our structure, we have subsidiaries, 2 subsidiaries, DFI, which is involved in long-term financing. We have TAB Corporate, which squarely looks at the working capital component. But again, we have TAB Rasilimali, which looks at the capital market. So we have 3 entities in one, which are catering for the requirements of any investor. If you're looking for long-term finance, then you'll come to the DFI. If you're looking at working capital, then you'll see the TAB Corporate. But if you are looking for capital enhancement through the capital markets, then you could approach our subsidiary. We wanted to look at the economic development features and where are we. There are different patterns. You could look at qualitative concepts, but you could also look at the sectorial, but you could also look at economic development in terms of structural transformation. I tried to look at economic development under the structural transformation. Where we are trying to move at the center, at the industry. Most of our countries are still agrarian. We are still on the agriculture. But our interest is basically to move to industrial, where the share of the GDP coming out of industry is much more pronounced. And looking at per capita of 12,000, you are now moving to the service sector, where service sector is more prevalent. You heard about the numbers which were talked by the SADC Secretariat on the 2,000 and the 9,000. So most of our countries are moving from the agriculture to industries, and with the per capita of 1,200, that's when you could jump into industrial, and above 12,000, then you could be moving to the service sector. But we wanted to, where we as a country, the SADC Secretariat talked about one variable, which is the performance of Tanzania in terms of GDP. The overall performance of Tanzania is within the SADC primary convergence indicators. We picked 3 indicators. One is inflation, the other one is fiscal balance, and the other one is public debt and real GDP growth. We are within all the bands of the convergence indicators. And in line with the main objectives of the SADC, the community has set convergence indicators, which each country is required, to reorient its policies, economic policies, so that, we achieve economic development, peace and security, growth and alleviate poverty, enhance standards of living and quality of the people within the region. So these are some of the indicators which each country is trying to achieve. Now for Tanzania, we are already there. And we heard the president when he was talking about the projects, talking about SGR, talking about Rufiji, talking about revamping ATC, the crude oil pipeline, the Kigongo and Busus, a lot of infrastructures which are coming up. And remembering what Professor Kabagambi said in the morning, Tanzania has decided. Tanzania tumeamua, and we can't wait. That's why you could see where we are. Why am I saying about this? These investments, they all require investment. And where is the investment coming from? Much of it is coming from the balance sheet of the government. But we have DFI who can also chip in and enhance the speed of investment in these infrastructure. As per the the 5-year development plan, the FIDP2, the total budget was around 122 trillion, which comes about $53 billion, to implement the entire 5-year plan. Part of it was to come from the government, around $36 billion, but 17 billion was to come from the private sector. So private sector seated in here, there is a room where a number of projects are waiting for funding, and DFIs are there to support you. Talking about challenges of industrial sector. We have talked about a number of challenges. Most of them are there. Access, to good and supportive infrastructure. I'm not seeing my friend Shamte here. When talking about conducive environment, for him, is basically financial resources. But for us, it's wider than financial resources. But again, looking at our economies, there is a bit of a slow transformation from informality to formality. You see, the moment you want to engage banks, then some kind of movement, a shift from informality to formality is critical, because we are talking about legal contracts, we are talking about engaging. So formality becomes a necessity. The other bit is access to markets, substandard products and unfair competition, access to raw materials, skilled manpower, weak project planning and implementation. And this is an issue when talking about project financing. Other challenges is basically when we're talking about absence of project preparation fund. And this is where we're talking about the RDF, Regional Development Fund, so that projects comes on the table when they are actually ready-made, ready for financing, rather than pushing on the table just ideas. We need to push the project to a level where they could compete for resources. So you need resources, to prepare your project. The other bit is basically an appropriate financing of development, which is dependent on short-term financing. You have a long-term, 1 minute? Thank you. Now, outcome of low-level industrialization is basically capital flight, diminishing employment creation, uncertainty in commodity prices, and probably retarding innovation. We can jump on some of the slides. What are the sources of industrial financing? They could come from private capital markets, DFIs, equity and wealth funds, public, DFIs, government collections from the government balance sheet. You're talking about pension funds, development partners, but there are limitations. Public financing is not sufficient. Private financing is too cautious, risk cautious. Challenges in obtaining industrial financing, shallow markets in most of our countries. Private sector is skewed to profit maximization. Government collection of taxes in most of our countries, collection of taxes is still weak. Pension insurances policies are not yet much aligned to support industrialization. But within the region, our capital markets are not that much strong to support. But even if you're looking beyond the borders, outside, at times you find conflicting priorities between the countries and external partners. Additional challenges, and what do we do? We thought probably if we could have a strategy. Strategies, one is both at country level and regional level, where we could centralize our projects and then mobilize resources as a bucket, rather than go project by project. But again, the other piece is, how do we prioritize our project? In areas where a project could generate its own cash flow, we think it should not queue for the tax bucket. Any project which has sustainable cash flow should queue for funding from banks and DFIs. And some kind of syndication, if the balance sheet of individual DFIs are not enough, then you can syndicate and leverage with the resources you have and be able to implement a project. The other strategy is basically using the local DFIs. Sorry. The technology is not fair. But again, financing through local DFIs. Why are we focusing on use of local DFIs? They have the local knowledge. So you can team up, as a foreign player, you can team up with a local DFI and undertake a project. This would support the local DFI and also support the government on easing the burden which could sit on its balance sheet. They are best placed to provide financing on greenfield given the local knowledge. But again, there are some issues with local DFI. Most of the local DFIs, they are state-owned, but most of them are undercapitalized. So the aspect of capitalization of DFIs so that they can contract bigger tickets is critical. And also having risk mitigation instruments like guarantees, which could be provided within the region. But the other piece was on enhancing governance in the DFIs by embarking on prudential and regulatory standards where they can enhance their governance and be credible to funders. The other piece is basically on establishment of a regional development fund, which could be accessed by DFI. The other piece, within the region is how do we link the SME sector and industries? Because if we create the base of SME, which could be feeding into the industries, then we'll have a sustainable industrial development in a country. Because if we leave the SME and they don't hook up, with the industries, then we'll be not developing sustainable industries within the region. Innovations are required through the value chain, where we could de-risk some of the risks along the value chain by bringing interventions and bringing in funders at different pieces where one could intervene and create a sustainable flow of products along the value chain. Lastly, how do we execute this one? We are seeing syndication as one of the solutions where we could pool resources and be able to execute a bigger project. The other piece is for the SADC to fast track the establishment of regional development fund, which could cater both on the project preparation, but also to augment the funding for DFI. Most of the DFIs do not have cross-border mandate. Most of them are localized. Very few have a mandate to have cross-border investment. So we need also to look at this and expand the horizon where DFI could invest. So allow border financing through local DFIs and connect with other DFIs. With the long-term nature of industrial project, local DFI should play a key role in promoting industries through innovative long-term financing, setting up investment platform through local DFIs, and leverage available resources for industrial financing. The other piece, and the last one, was basically capitalizing local DFI. I remember someone talked about breaking the silos. In most of the cases, we operate in silos, and we need partnerships. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Charles Singili, MD of the Tanzania Investment Bank. We'll also hear from the other DFI that he mentioned later when the panelists come up. So we have two more presentations to go. And I trust my participants will keep them quite short and sweet. We have Dr. Alawi Swaberi, Member UN Business and Steering Committee on Financing Development and CEO for Europe, Asia, and Africa. And that will be followed by Mr. Kay Parplees of the European Union.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. As has already been said, I'm Alawi Swaburi coming from Berlin, from United Nations Finance for Development. Allow me, before I talk about the industrialization, okay. Okay. So now, as I said, allow me for 2 minutes to talk about my person. I am originally not economist. I'm a medical doctor. After finishing my study, I came back to Tanzania and started working in a hospital. And I realized that most of the disease that I was trying to tackle was the poverty-related disease. And I realized that there's no way I can cure those medicine. There's no medicine for that poverty-related disease. Then I decided to go back to school and take economics. So I took this serious. I ended up even advising the United Nations General Secretary on how to finance and how to reach the Global Millennium Development Goal by including the private sector. So how to finance, how to make finance accessible to private sector, that is something that I'm going to talk to you. So I've traveled all the way from Germany to be given 10 minutes. Please, the problem we have here in most of African countries is in access to finance. And I'm working with all these finance institutions globally, and I'm here really to give you the information that the finance shouldn't be a problem when we wanted to industrialize our countries. So give me maybe 3 minutes or more than that so that brother and sister could get information what I'm working about. So here are the activities that I'm going to talk about, in nutshell about financial industrialization, finance from Europe, finance from China, finance from the Gulf state. So we are working with the 3 regions as a member of the United Nations Steering Committee on Finance for Development. I have a very good access to all financial epicenters. Taking New York, Hong Kong, Japan, Shanghai, Frankfurt, where I'm coming from. So there's a lot of those funds out there, and we are there to make this accessible for you. I'm sorry. So now, starting with an opportunity from the European Union. So we are working with the EDFIs all over European Union. So we are talking about the ED and the DFIs here in Africa. So where we think that we could collaborate with the DFI here in the SADC, so to mobilize the funding from these institutions which are having a lot of money to support our region. I'm sorry, I don't know what is going on here. So, is there anybody from the technique so that he can just help me? You guys, can you come, please? The lady with the timetable, with the timeline, could you please come and just try to set out this one? Because I'm having no time, I need to talk to all this. So could you come, please, and manage this? So as I was talking that we have a lot of funding, and so we are working very closely with European EDFIs, providing credit line to the local banks in Africa in the different sectors, the major sector being industrialization, infrastructure, and agribusiness. So those areas are the area that we have funding that could help the regional and the local DFIs here in Africa to address the. Where are they? Please.
Don't wave it into this because it has to go to the back there. That's where the scene is at the top.
So could you put it, backward?
Is that back?
No, back.
Back is here.
No, don't put it into the wall. Make sure it goes up there to the scene.
Where?
Back.
Raise it above the podium.
Okay.
It doesn't work. So.
They were telling me from here. Okay.
So here we are. Okay, so the next one.
This one.
Okay, so now then I want to just here.
Now forward, you press this.
Okay.
This one, the big one.
Okay. So as I said, the sector supported by the ADFIs, as I mentioned there, is the financial sector, industrialization sector, manufacturing and agribusiness. And the instrument they are having the equity, loans, and the guarantees. So those are the areas that we can help you as far as the European Union is concerned, addressing the constraint of the financing in the local. And as from there, we go to the opportunity fund in China. So my organization was appointed to be a member of the so-called China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, which took place last June in Changsha, China, where our institution was the single African institution that allowed to prepare as a co-partner of the first China-Africa, and where our role was to identify the 8th initiative of President Xi, which was declared last year in August during the FOCOC. I hope most of you have been there attending that event. So the FOCOC event, the President Xi came up with the 8th initiative, which include, the first one is the Industrial Promotion Initiative. The Industrial Promotion Initiative followed by, I'm going to talk on the capacity building. Maybe these two things are very important when it comes to industrialization in Africa. So, supporting this 8th initiative, China put together $60 billion US, that $15 billion, which is a grants and interest rate free loans, and the 20 billion is credit line, 20 billion is special fund for development financing, 5 billion special fund for financing import from Africa. This is where we have industrialization, where we have agriculture support, where if you wanted to do any value addition, you can have access to that 5 billion, and our institution is working very closely with those institutions, which I'm going to be showing you in the next slide. And the third one is 10 billion investment directed to Chinese company, so which is 10 billion investment directed by Chinese company. So that means the Chinese company are compelled by the president to invest 10 billion in the next 3 years to Africa. This is where we can do the JV between African company and their counterparty from China. So here we are. There's a special China-Africa Fund for Industrialization Cooperation. This is exactly what we are talking about, talking today. So, there's a $10 billion US for China-Africa Fund for Industrialization. We have been working with these guys for the last 5 years. We have done a lot in Uganda. We have done a lot in Ethiopia, and we are now working with them. Now we have another 10 billion from the China-Africa Development Fund, which is more or less equity, so in cooperation with the Chinese company. And we have China Development Bank also managing another 10 billion, which, as I said in my previous folio or slide, that is for directly financing the financial institution in Africa. So any bank in Africa which is looking for fund, we are here to support you to access this 10 billion so that you can, at the end of the day, do the on lending to the SMEs here and the private sector in general. So there's another fund managed by the Development Bank, which is 1 billion. This is the financing for SMEs and a direct fund for SMEs in sub-Saharan Africa. And the last, which I already mentioned, is the fund which is 5 billion for value addition, which is managed by the Exim Bank of China. So this is the fund which I said when we are talking about agro-business in the adding value, agro-processing, the fund that you can access direct. And within the Belt and Road Initiative, there's a $25 billion US that can also be accessed through joint venture with the Chinese counterpart. So I've already spoken about this one, and we go to the second. So as from the Gulf states, we have the Abu Dhabi Fund, which has got at least 21 billion US dollar for that purpose, interested in infrastructure support, agro support, agro and the real estate. Then we have Kuwaiti Fund, which has got 21 Qatar and Kuwaiti dinar, which is almost 12 billion US dollar, and Saudi Fund for Development has got 31 billion Saudi Riyal, which is almost 80 billion. So their major area is the financial sector, infrastructure, industry, agribusiness, as well as the instrument they are providing, the equity loans and grants. So here, when it comes to grants, I will request something that we cannot do is where the G2G could be involved in addressing that. So in short, that is what, so we are talking about the problem with the finance. As I said, there's a lot of money fund out there. So we are working with those institutions to support them and bring this information to you, to our brothers and sisters down here. But at the same time, we think it is not only finance which is a problem. We have another problem with the investment in the local people, that mean capacity building. So we're addressing the issue of the capacity building, because you cannot only buy machines and all this, so you need to have talented people. So we invest in young people. So together with the Chinese, the capacity building program from the China government has provided 50,000 scholarship to young people, 50,000 scholarship for young people in Africa, and 50,000 scholarship for training for young people from Africa. So as I'm talking now, we are already having 20 students from Tanzania, 20 from Uganda participating from this program. So if you have somebody who want to study in China using those funds, please, this is the address. So I'm sure that there's no problem of funding, there's a problem of information. So we are here to give you information, whatever you want when it comes to constraint. So I'm taking that together. We can shift from poverty to prosperity. Thank you for your attention.
This yours? Thank you very much, Dr. Alawi. May I please call to the stage from the European Union, Head of Investment and Innovative Finance, Mr. K. Please. Karibu. So we should just not point it into this, to point it up there.
Up there, okay. All right, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And actually, thank you to the previous speakers, because they almost gave a perfect introduction to my short intervention. I have just a couple of PowerPoints. But just to say, I work, as you kindly introduced me, I work for the European Union's Development Cooperation Directorate at the European Commission. We're strictly speaking a donor, but as we have seen during the day today, really investment is fundamental to industrialization, but also to development, simply because it lays the foundation to future growth, to job creation, and to basically all the things that you need for development. That's why we, as a development directorate, we're placing increasing emphasis, and we're really placing investment front and center of our development cooperation activities. Just trying to queue up. There we go. Okay. So investment is becoming more and more important in terms of what the European Union is doing in its cooperation activities. And really, a lot of what the colleagues have said, I think the previous presentation was a really good introduction, actually, to my talk, except that I don't have the Chinese behind me, but we have some quite substantial funds that we have made available and that we're actually making available to support investment going forward. Well, this slide was just to show that relatively obvious fact that ODA, official development assistance, it has been growing over the last decades. It's likely to grow modestly, but it's absolutely dwarfed by the various global investment flows, both in terms of foreign direct investment, but also portfolio investment and different types of investment. So what that means is that anything I can do to tweak those brown and green curves a little bit upward and divert some of those investment flows to Africa and to SADC will give me a much bigger development impact than anything I can do with grants and all that. We think it's also important, looking at how donors have worked traditionally, to decisively make sure that people perceive Africa as an investment opportunity and not as a place where you send grants or something like that. It's an investment opportunity, and we want to make that more obvious to our constituencies in Europe, which is why we have set up what we call the EU External Investment Plan. I'll do the clicking. I'll skip quite a few slides here. So what we're doing is the following. We make quite some money available. We have 1.5 billion euros in funds that guarantee around 44 billion euros in investment in Africa. We will probably increase that money tenfold to about 15, 16 billion euros from 2021, because we've recognized that guarantees that de-risk private investors, that try to address the kind of risks, often they're simply perceived risks, that prevent people from coming and investing. To address those risks, we recognized and we have found that this is a very, can be a very effective instrument, and I will give some examples in a minute to show what that means. We're providing technical assistance, but then very importantly, and probably key, is that we're working with our partners to improve the investment climate. That can include many of the initiatives that my previous speakers have made, industrial parks, the right regulatory environment to make these regional industrial parks work, trade agreements, that kind of thing, is extremely important to provide a conducive environment for people to come and invest, whether or not there are grant funds or something available. In fact, this afternoon we're launching the support to investment and business environment. It's a major important EU program that we're launching together with SADC. I think it's 4:15 today we have the launch event. That's a very important component of our work to improve the investment climate and make sure investors look at SADC and look at as Africa as the place to go. It's not all about Asia. Africa is really the place to go in a lot of industries. That's surely how we see it. I'll skip through a few. So this integrated approach, 3 pillars, investment environment, that's supported by both grant funds for technical assistance and investment guarantees. That's the approach that we're taking going forward. How does that work in practice? No, I have to plug it here, right? Voila, this is, going back, voila. Our guarantees are extremely flexible. They can basically address any kind of risks that investors perceive and that's holding them back. How that can work in practice, for example, looking at SMEs, colleagues mentioned SMEs. We work with local partner banks to push them into new markets that in many African countries that are underserved at the small enterprise level, to provide more lending to, let's say, women entrepreneurs, to young people, and also to very small enterprises. So we have a bunch of very innovative guarantee products where our partners go out and push your banks, your commercial banks, into these markets where they're not going right now. We're providing equity and venture capital to African entrepreneurs. Moving on to the renewable energy sector, which is a very important sector because it's growing fast and it has a lot of potential to provide Africa with the energy and the electricity it needs. We can de-risk renewable energy projects to make them viable even in market environments where investors have doubt. That concerns in particular the offtake agreements, people that are into these kind of projects. The offtake agreements that power projects conclude with local utilities, they have to work and investors have to trust them over a large number of years, 10, 15 years. Some investors don't trust the local utility to honor such an agreement over such a long period of time. That's where we can come in and backstop these offtake agreements, which removes a crucial bottleneck to a lot of energy projects. So we're doing renewable energy and energy more broadly, but also infrastructure projects, ports, for example, we're supporting where we can, for example, cover the construction period, which is the most critical period for investors. So we cover a lot of those risks. We also, we've talked today about the new flyover on the way from the airport, and actually the airport terminal, the new terminal in itself. We support public-private partnerships at the municipal level to make more of these projects happen. That's both for urban transport, for waste management, water projects across the municipal sector. We're supporting these kind of PPPs with investment guarantees that make it possible for private investors, not only DFIs and public investors, to come in and provide financing for these projects. We're also doing quite some work in digital infrastructure, which includes both the physical infrastructure, like broadband networks and so on, but we're also supporting via guarantees, but also via venture capital, the kind of digital platforms that will be extremely important for the future, and that often have business models, because providing an additional product once you have set up a platform is actually not very expensive, that have great potential for various African markets, even the more difficult markets that we find. So we see some very exciting opportunities for investment across Africa, including SADC, of course, and we think by providing them with a little nudge, we can bring a lot more private investment into the continent. Now, I've been happy to see our flag on the PowerPoint slides here. So it's very important people know that we're behind a lot of these projects. But the fact is that we are actually behind some of the same logos that the colleague actually put up. So we set up these guarantee programs together with our partner DFIs, like the European Investment Bank, the various EU bilateral institutions. We work with the African Development Bank, which is actually an extremely important partner, the World Bank, the Dutch Development Bank, FMO. So we work with about a good handful of partners, including the EDFIs that the colleague mentioned, actually, the European Development Finance Institutions. So we work with these partners, and those are the people actually you will see in the market with these guarantee products. I mentioned SME loans to women and young people. It's FMO, the Dutch bank, that is in the market. They signed the first deal. It was in Jordan, okay, outside SADC, but they're already very active. And some other of these institutions are already developing various renewable energy port projects with the support from our guarantees. So watch out for these partners. They're in the market, and they will become much more active in the next couple of years in bringing specifically private investment into Africa. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you actually for this event, because I think I mean, we're all thinking in the exact same direction. So it's actually great to speak at this event, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. K. Parplees from the European Union. And with that, we've finished with the presentations. We have a very interesting panel that will be coming up after the presenters move down. So may I please ask for a round of applause for our presenters, and may I ask them please to take their seats downstairs as I welcome up my panelists, starting with Mr. Jafet Justin, Managing Director of TADB, please come up. Mr. Zainul Chandu, Head of Treasury, Stanbic, Tanzania. Ms. Linda Tegisa, Head of Trade Finance, NMB. Mr. Semi Kamal, Arab Bank of Economic Development. And Dr. Thomas Viot, please welcome on to the stage. Please take a seat. The gentleman from Zumbe, if I recall your question, I think if you've been paying attention, particularly in the last two presentations, we have heard of the... Yes. Yes, we have Ms. Lubna instead of Mr. Samir. Welcome. And you've seen there's certain financing that's being made available through local partner banks in order to reach out to SME, youth, women financing. So really the question now is we have to ask the banks. So pretty much here there's a strong representation of DFI, commercial banks, even those operating within our current market. So we should take around 25 minutes or so, or half an hour. Lunch should be ready around 1:30. So I think that will be an opportune time for us to break from the discussion. If we have time for a few questions, we'll try and manage that. But for now, I'd like to go through our panelists, and really my main question for each one of them, and we'll start from Jafet here, is number one, their reaction to the presentations, and as the theme says, opportunities and challenges in financing industrialization. We'll give it 3 minutes or so, 3-5, and then obviously we'll come back with more discussions later. So welcome, Japheth. Not because the other DFI used the podium, but I think his mic is giving him some trouble.
All right, thank you so much. My good name is Japheth Justin. As he said, I'm the Managing Director of the Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank. I'm happy to be here, and congratulations to the previous presenter. Quite an insightful presentation. As my colleagues have put it forward, I think the biggest issue we have, and I alluded from being in a DFI, capital isn't an issue. And my colleague have mentioned it, key is how do we mobilize the finances as one, and second, how do we deploy the finances, but thirdly will all be how do we recycle the finances. As a DFI, my role is mainly to mobilize finances, and I play the public role, and I bring in money, and through deploying them in viable projects. So they have said it very well that there are a lot of opportunities, especially when I look at agriculture side. Looking at the entire continent of Africa, we are importing goods worth more than $30 billion annually, of which if you look for a country like DRC, they've got arable land of almost 80 million hectares idle to produce. And if you look at the context of Tanzania, we as Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank, we have been given the mandate to design projects, and not only design projects, but at the same time look at the possible options on how to finance. This is a particular example. We're trying to build a project, and we believe that financing of agriculture is not like any other financing. It's more of an art. It's more of a financial conversation with the investors or any particular individual who is involved in the value chain, and bring them together so that you can be to unlock the transaction. This is Tanzania. You look at it, agriculture is contributing around 23% of our GDP, and that's the same almost pretty much for the SADC countries. You look at the land we have as a country, which can be utilized. You're talking about 15,000 Arab lands. But let me say, why did the government build DFI like Tanzania Agricultural Development Bank? Critical, we need to see that the bank was built as an instrument to support the industrialization or agro-processing in the country. In the initial agriculture, we used to run it as a business as usual, and everybody is looking at a farmer as any other person, but we are looking at the farmer as an investor. And if he is an investor, we believe the farmer needs to hear about return on investment, not only produce, but at the same time, we need to build a mechanism which will give a farmer quite a role on why is he spending most of his time, and at the same time, we need to be able to show that when you spend much time, this is the investment you expect out of your investment. So what I can say, the government have supported us to raise funds. We've got a sovereign guarantee. We borrowed from FDB, which is our biggest funder for now. They've supported us with more than $92 million. We have funded more than 94 agricultural projects. And all these projects, we have impacted more than 1 million smallholder farmers. And we foresee that using our role as a DFI, we are able to get into relationship with other DFIs, and we are now into discussions. But we believe this is just one. But another room, as my colleagues have put it forward, is when we design projects, especially the agricultural products or the agricultural projects. Key question is, if I want to finance, we need to be able and clear on how the financing of a transaction will look like. Is it, will it attract a private equity player? Will it attract a venture capital player? Or will it need working capital from commercial banks? Or will it need a longer term financing from TADB? So when we structure our transaction, most of the time we leverage on other FDIs because we believe, and other commercial banks, because we believe as TADB alone, we cannot really make huge changes or significant impact if we don't involve other players. So we look forward that FDIs toward Africa, they are, yes, someone might say they're growing up. Like last year in 2018, it was around $46 billion. But in other key sectors, you see the FDIs across some countries, they're going down. And that calls for a wide understanding among we in SADC, like how can we raise our tax bases so that we'll be able to generate enough funds to finance our projects. But that's one. Second is how do we use instruments like DFIs to go, bring in the funding, and then use the funding to advance to potential private players vis-a-vis public players. So all in all, I should tell you, and this is our practical experience. Past 5 years, we've been in the market. What we are seeing, the problem remains on the quality of the business proposals or the quality of projects which are being brought forward. And we believe if we'll be able to unlock quality of the proposals or quality of the business cases, then financing isn't quite a big problem. Just last week, I was working on cashew nut plant. This lady or this team submitted to me a $34 million transaction. When I received the application, we looked at the business case. For us, it was viable. You know, if you look in Africa or in the world, Tanzania is number 6 in producing cashew nut. But we've been exporting 90% of our raw cashew nut. So most likely, most of our raw products are not being processed here. So the industrialization, especially through agro-processing, that's critical. So this project was $34 million. And what I did, or what we did, we've got our partner banks, or partner DFIs. We forwarded to them like, we want to syndicate this transaction. And I can tell you, we secured the funding, the $34 million. We received the 70% from one DFI agreed, and another bank in Mauritius agreed to do another 30%. So we were able to cover the entire $34 million. And this is where I want to build agriculture. I don't want to talk